Okay, so our speakers today are the guys from Rocky Linux. We're fortunate to have them because their first released candidate is due out this Friday, I believe, and that's in about 48 hours. So all that in less than 5 months from the announcement of the intention to start the Rocky Linux project, and I think that's a pretty impressive achievement. I understand a lot of effort during that time has been put into not just standing up the technical infrastructure and getting contributors on board and building the teams, but also setting up the legal entity behind the project and creating a community charter. And I think there were things like getting FIPS compliance from the outset so the project can be successful and sustainable. So this has not been just a technical challenge. So I understand that the way this will work is this is largely going to be a Q&A, but the guys will be doing a quick introduction to the project, and I think the RESF, if that's the right acronym. So if you have any questions for the guys, this is a Q&A. If you type them out into the chat and we'll read them out for you. We try to avoid people unmuting and muting and generally descending into chaos. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat. And so with that, I'm going to hand over the microphones to the Rocky Linux team. That's Greg Kurtzer, Leigh Hennig, Lewis Abel, and Jordan is not with us, unfortunately. But guys, please introduce yourselves.
Hi, yeah, Leigh, go for it. You start.
Yeah, sorry. So my name is Leigh Hennig. I'm the Director of Operations for Rocky Linux. My background is in networking, infrastructure, hyperscale, and lab space. I have a little bit to do with just about everything that we do. Yeah, you've reminded us. Well, we didn't need reminding, but the 30th is coming up real quick. So pretty much all of us, including me, are even doing some package development work today and for the rest of the week. So that's one of my more recent things that I've started working on. But Greg, go ahead. Why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I can do a quick introduction. I'm a biochemist by degree. Went through some .coms in the 90s, landed at the Department of Energy where I focused on high performance computing and spent about 17, 18 years there. In that role, I created a number of open source projects that were used quite heavily throughout the ecosystem. Big one was on the HPC side of something called Werewolf. Then created CentOS. After CentOS, I did a few other things, weren't quite as big. And then more recently created a container system called Singularity for high performance computing, and then Rocky. So I'm CEO now twice of 2 startups and founder and director of what we're doing here with Rocky. So it's great to meet everybody. Thank you for having us. Maybe it makes sense for me to hand the talking stick over to another member of the team. So I'm going to hand it over to Hayden.
Throw me under the bus a little bit there. Yeah, so I'm Hayden. Very briefly introduced myself a few minutes ago, but I'm the web team lead. I have nowhere near as an impressive track record as Greg does, but I work for an MSP in Sheffield, and I mainly work with the sort of websites that we build specifically for the Rocky Linux stuff. That's and I'm also the design team lead as well. So the logo and that sort of thing was the handiwork of me and a few others in the community. So I think I'm gonna throw Neil under the bus and ask him to go through things now.
Hey folks, name's Neil Hamlin. I'm the infrastructure team lead along with Taylor Goodwill. Not much to say really. I'm kind of a network engineer by trade, Linux guy. Don't really have much to show for myself, but super excited to be working on Rocky Linux and excited to, be here and answer any questions that people might have. Who wants to take it next? Lewis?
So I'm Lewis Abel. I lead the release engineering team, but I also I am also under infrastructure with Neil and Taylor, since I handle some infra stuff and some identity management stuff. My background is in Linux administration and engineering, so I've been doing that for basically way too long. But I enjoy it, so that's why I'm still here. So that's it for me.
I think we have Rob. I thought I saw him on the call earlier too. Rob, are you around?
Yes, I'm around. So I'm Rob Felsberg. I'm director of our security team here. Occasionally help out on the infra side, but fairly infrequently, as Neil and Taylor have it very much in hand, thankfully. I'm a systems and security engineer and a manager and director by trade. Doing this for 20 some odd years now. That's about it. I didn't see or hear anybody else on. Taylor was on at one point.
Yeah, hi. My name is Taylor Goodwill, and I work on the infrastructure team along with everyone else who's spoken. Mostly, I've been a Linux sysadmin for 20 some odd years myself. Now I'm a director of technical operations at a SaaS company. My background is generally with telcos and other software as a service companies.
Also here is Michael and Wally, I see, and I'm looking to see if I recognize anyone else from our team. So Michael, why don't you start and then hand it over to Wally?
Sure. So I am the web team deputy. I mainly work with the main website, and I do a little graphics work. I own a creative agency, and I currently work for Intuit, but I'm going full time with my creative agency. So that's what I do. And Wally.
Well, my name is Wally Shoyinka. I lead the doc group, the documentation group, and I work with the rest of this fine folks here that have introduced themselves, and that's it.
I think that's pretty much everybody on our team. I see Brian, but I don't think it's our Brian. Is anybody else that I have missed out? Then make sure to speak up. Otherwise, yeah, I think it makes sense. Maybe we can just give a quick background of the RESF and how we came to be, and then start going through the questions that are piling up in the chat. So I think Greg really tells the kind of story better about how we started, and I think given that he started this as well, it makes sense to have him kind of talk a little bit about how we came to be.
So there was a point made, and I think it was John speaking before us. I apologize. I think your camera went off and I lost the placement. But the point was, CentOS is not dead. It may have been, undergone a flesh wound, but it is in fact not dead. And I wanted to reiterate that. But a certain portion of it is, because CentOS was originally founded with the idea of being a community enterprise operating system. And I think it's kind of an interesting place to start here, which is, kind of what we've seen just recently. We've seen a decision happen which was very negative and adversely affected the community at large. So there's the C in CentOS. And enterprise, it's now running before Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's running in front of it. To most organizations, that would be considered kind of a beta or a tech preview version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, as opposed to a stable enterprise operating system. So from my perspective, in terms of the goals that CentOS originally set out to solve, CentOS is no more. It is no longer solving the same problem and the same issues that it originally set out to solve. And that is why you see this community here that is formed. The community grew extraordinarily quickly because this was such a catastrophic blow to so many enterprises, organizations, and individuals in terms of their infrastructure and what are they going to do when CentOS does pivot out of this community enterprise operating system role. So that was why we spun up. I posted a comment on the blog announcement from CentOS saying, hey, I've been thinking about doing this. Anybody wants to join, jump into this Slack. And within a couple months, we had over 10,000 people join. And it was kind of a unique experience because, as you may imagine, getting messages and floods of communications all happening simultaneously of people saying, how can we help? What do we do? What do you want us to do? And all of a sudden, my full-time job, day and night, became just answering questions and trying to manage and trying to organize the team, organize what we're doing, and try to get a hold of this and a handle of it. And the team leads that you see here, plus others that couldn't make it, as well as a huge amount of people on the community side, have all really just done a phenomenal job. I mean, I could take a tiny little bit of credit, if at all any, and that would be it. And that's really just being the focus point to help people assemble and go in the right direction. Rocky Linux is the culmination of a lot of people's work at this point. And I'm just fortunate enough to have a great team and be part of that great team. So we're lucky that we have a lot of this team here today. So I don't want to hog the mic too much, which I tend to do. So I'm really trying not to. And I want to give everybody an opportunity to talk and really voice their perspectives, because this is absolutely 100% a team effort. And it's a team effort, not only of, as I said, the people that are here, but the community that's standing behind this and all of the enterprise organizations that are affected by this and now coming together to solve this problem. And that's really what we are about. The Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation, RESF, is really a way that we are helping to organize this initiative and share and manage the load as well as the burden of organization and just keeping everything running in the right direction. So that's really, from my perspective, that's the biggest piece of this, is really just the organization side of it. There's one more thing I think that's really important to talk about, which is how did this whole thing kind of happen? Like, why did CentOS end up pivoting? And I tend to go right back to the beginning, when CentOS was initially formed. This is 16, 17 years ago now. And we started off really trying to solve this problem. And it was a much more urgent timeline than we have now, right? I don't know if people remember this, but Red Hat Linux used to be the standard Linux distribution from Red Hat. It was all freely available. Red Hat completely end-of-lifed all of the versions of Red Hat Linux in one day. We had no notification that this was going to happen, no foreshadowing, and all of a sudden, boom, everything was end-of-lifed. We had to move very quickly. Luckily, the team that built CentOS, we were first working on another operating system called Chaos Linux, and we were already doing a lot of this. But long story short, that team was very small. And it was small because we had to manage the security credentials of the RPMs that we're signing, those cryptographic private keys. So those RPM signatures had to be managed, and we didn't have an infrastructure to manage it. It was a very small group of people then, and that's how we managed the trust of that. So one of the and that created a culture of the CentOS team that was always kind of very small, tight knit, and not opening up a lot of the development and sharing a lot of that development across other people. That's something that we strove to fix. Strove, is that a word? Strived to fix immediately. which is we need to create up an infrastructure and a platform such that we can have a large number of community individuals and contributors and organizations to be part of this and to share this burden and share this load. And that's what we did. And that's why it's taken us, how old are we now at this point? What, 5 months old at this point? If we would have started off just building the operating system, we probably would have been done a few months ago, at least a couple months ago. But instead, what we started off doing is building an infrastructure that we can further create that operating system in a very scalable way. And this is why the infrastructure team is here. This is why the security team is here, as well as our development team and web team, because we are all working together to create a very large capability such that this can always be maintained as a community endeavor and not limited to a small number of people. So, okay, I've talked enough. Thank you for letting me hog the mic. I want to get to some of the questions as I see the chat kind of busting out on the side. So, and I want to let my team answer as much of that as possible. So I'm going to go back on mute. And Adam, are you emceeing?
Yeah, sure. I'll read out the questions. As it happens, most of the conversation is about whether strove is a word, or whether it's strived or stroved. We'll let that one go on. As it happens, everybody else is being fairly quiet with questions, so I will ask some that I had prepared just in case.
There is one question, Adam.
Yeah.
So Gustavo has asked, what will Rocky Linux do that will prevent it from being controlled by a big vendor, like what happened with CentOS?
I'm happy to take it. Leigh, but I want to give others a chance to talk. Leigh, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. So we published last month our community charter, and that starts out with the preamble that kind of just describes who we are and how we came to be and what our mission is. But we go on to describe our purpose, our vision, our mission, principles, and values. And the way that the team is structured, there's a separate document that the two really kind of go together on our website. But in addition to the community charter and the organizational structure, the way that we have set things up is so that we don't have any single entity that has a controlling influence in what we're doing and who we are. So, and that we're really rather fanatical about that. So that even comes into play into our build infrastructure, for instance. So, whatever tools that we're using or whatever build infrastructure that we have in place, whatever vendors we're using, we don't do anything that locks us or ties us into any single vendor. So right now, our build infrastructure is largely in AWS, but we haven't used any AWS specific tools that would tie us to them. So if we needed to flip to another, provider or bare metal, it wouldn't be really any trouble to do so. So we're really fanatical about ensuring that all of our tooling and all of everything that we do is not beholden to any specific entity. So we have some sponsors and partners, for instance, but we're very upfront with them as well that we're more than happy for their support. But even they don't have the ability to influence, what we do. So being upfront with our community charter and then our organizational structure, we have, all the team leads make up, our advisory board. That's kind of how we've gone about making sure that we don't have, what happened to happened to us. So that was one of the earliest questions that we really asked ourselves. Does that just about cover it? Is there anything you might want to add to that, Greg?
I can't help but thinking that I think you touched on a lot of really important points. I can't help but thinking again that kind of that small community that was always CentOS, that very small tight team, actually lended itself to being acquired, because Red Hat only then had to only had to hire a few individuals to basically get control of the CentOS assets. the more people that are involved, the larger that this community can be, and the more people that are in charge of making decisions actually will protect the organization from being controlled by or purchased even by a single entity. So that's about the only thing I would add to that, Leigh.
Yeah, I think, you know, our intent as well, being signaled through our legal entity, the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation, as a public benefit B Corp, you know, helps to insulate that, you know, a little bit as well. I don't know if that satisfactorily answered the question, but you know, like Greg and I both just said, there's a lot of things that we just touched on, so I'm not sure if there's anything in that anybody would like to dig at further, or.
I mean, I think that's covered kind of the central point that was asked. I mean, I think it's kind of really important that people remember that it needs to stay as a project and not become a product, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge point. That is a huge point. The moment that there is a product, there is now a conflict of interest. And if a single organization is managing both of those, you have a conflict of interest that you need to mitigate and manage. And that's a difficult problem to solve, right? At some point for every company, you know, revenue is going to win. you have to make revenue, right? It's a legal obligation and duty from the leaders of the organization to focus on value for shareholders, right? It just has to be that way. So as long as there's shareholders, there's and a product, there kind of is a conflict of interest to manage.
I'd like to ask a question that I think comes into part of this. And you mentioned I think it's the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation. Could you describe the organizational structure of the Rocky Linux project and where the RESF comes in?
Sure. So the RESF is basically just an entity, a legal US entity that we can basically do things like open up a bank account and get donations, be able to create you know, legal documents and actually point to those legal documents, or point within those legal documents to an entity. You need to have an entity in order to properly protect yourselves and what it is that you're doing. And that pretty much is the entire role of RESF. You know, Leigh mentioned the community charter. I would encourage everybody to go back and take a look at that community charter, because it does outline a lot of this in a lot more precise detail than I think I can do right now, kind of off the cuff. But it's generally, you can think of it as it's an umbrella organization, very similar to what software in the public interest is for Debian. So, you know, Debian has an organization behind it as well. It's not called Debian, it's called Software in the Public Interest, but it's very similar role as to that. We've also talked about allowing other projects that want to be that want to be part of this and are aligned with this vision that we have to be able to join this. Right now, the primary project of the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation is, of course, Rocky Linux. And the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation was really, you know, some of the things that are important to us and why we ended up creating it really had to do with a lot of what we're seeing, not only with what happened with CentOS, but other software products, specifically or mostly within the cloud world. But we've seen, and this is a highly, you know, religious topic for a lot of people, so I don't want to get into the religion, but there's you know, we've seen now quite a number of times where companies and organizations have pivoted open source projects and communities in such a way that has adversely affected other organizations that are monetizing on this or offering value. Elasticsearch is something that is even more recent than what Red Hat did with CentOS and IBM did with CentOS. So that's even more recent. But if you go back over the last, you know, few years, you'll probably see about a dozen or so different companies and different open source projects that have been pivoted. So part of what it is that we're trying to do is we're trying to create a organization really built around the notion that open source is not a switch for convenience. This is not something that, you know, just because you want open source now, you're going to flip the open source switch and you will flip it back when it no longer is convenient. and right, this is something that organizations, enterprises, people, individuals, even hobbyists need to have confidence that whatever they're building and whatever technology that they're using is not going to go away tomorrow because it didn't meet a particular corporate, milestone. And so long story short, perhaps too late, but that's kind of some of the guiding principles to what kind of created and what went into the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation and why it is that exists. So if other projects feel like they are aligned with this idea, we want to provide a platform. Platform's probably the wrong word. We want to provide some structure around that, both legal as well as just ideological, in terms of once something's open source, we're going to make sure that we can keep it open source. Part of that involves a contributor's license agreement, which basically says we don't want to own anybody's code, but by hosting it here, you're going to basically give us a license to use this and to keep this open source forever, right? A perpetual license to do that. And there's even a patent piece of that, which basically says you're free to go create a patent around this. We want you to, if this helps your business. But at the same token, we want to also ensure that all of our users and all the people out there, including us for doing what it is we're doing, like building an operating system in this case, aren't going to be negatively impacted by that patent. So you're giving us a license to use this moving forward. So these are some of the things that are really, kind of come down to our core beliefs and why it is we're doing this, and also why it is that we're here. Like we're here because a company pivoted an open source project and an open source community in such a way that was an adverse, have an adverse reaction to that community. What we're trying to do is create something stable with a high degree of confidence such that organizations and people feel comfortable using this.
The questions are starting to roll in now, so I'm happy to start throwing some of them at you from the audience. I'll start with this one. I wrongly assumed that the listener called, the attendee called listener was asking about scientific Linux, and I first suggested to him that maybe you weren't the right people to ask questions about scientific Linux, but it turns out that listener was asking, do you have any news from the scientific community or high performance computing communities about their intention to use Rocky Linux or to contribute or participate?
I've got two facets to this answer. First, I can answer directly, and the other one is I'm going to ask somebody else to jump in. The first one is about people that are running scientific, scientific systems, whether that be high performance computing clusters, whether that be big ones, small ones, or even individual desktops and workstations. There's a lot of need and interest in the scientific community for this, and my contacts and a large amount of my career has really been focused around that. So yeah, there's a lot of people that are interested in this, and as a matter of fact, even the early on with CentOS was actually originally kind of built around the idea of HPC as well. So there's definitely a huge amount of overlap there. Now, regarding scientific Linux, there's somebody here who I think might be able to answer that much better than I can, because he's actually works at Fermilab, but I'm not sure if he's ready to talk and get on mic. But Dave, if you can jump on that, that would be great. Talk a little bit about what you know about scientific.
First, I work for Fermilab, but I'm not speaking for them. But I will just say what I've heard from both Fermilab and CERN speak, and what they say, what they're going to do about the future of Linux, and they both agree that they're, for now, waiting to find out what happens. Well, deferring a decision, and in the meanwhile, using CentOS 7 and CentOS 8 stream. So that's as far as they're going right now.
It's very similar to what's happening with OpenHPC in that community at the moment. OpenHPC is a Linux foundation, and originally it was joint Linux Foundation and Intel, but I think now it's just Linux Foundation, but don't quote me on that. I apologize if I get that wrong. But they too are basically waiting, they're deferring a decision. One of the primary facets of that deterrence is basically just to see you know, when we release, and get an opportunity to actually get their hands on it before they make a decision. And I know that there's a lot of actually organizations that I've spoken to that are planning on using Rocky, but are not making the formal decision yet, or the organizational decision, until they can get their hands on it, which is one of the reasons why we are pushing so hard to get this release out now.
I used to work at MIT Lincoln Lab, and I have a lot of contacts over there still that I talk to that have pinged me, both at Lincoln and at JPL, who are watching what Rocky does very, very closely. And we've talked to a couple of other labs as well. We know that the scientific community is keenly interested, but you know, they're conservative with certain things, as you know, as they regularly should be. So I think they're taking the approach of wait and see. But you know, if we get it right, and we're pretty confident we will, I would not at all be surprised to see that you know, our uptake in the lab space is pretty swift.
John Kennedy, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. First of all, Leigh, I love your you've got an awesome workmate there behind you. Pretty relaxed. But Greg, with your experience starting both CentOS and now Rocky Linux, how has your approach to Rocky changed over the approach you took towards CentOS? You know, what kind of things did you learn, and have you done differently?
That is a great question. I started to allude towards that a little bit when I was talking about, you know, CentOS was always kind of had a culture, a very small culture around you know, a small trusted development team, and that was really driven by the fact that there was no sort of infrastructure wrapped around how can we properly protect our keys, those cryptographic signing keys. And so really, I mean, when we first started building CentOS, it was, you know, people were using their personal laptops, their personal workstations, and any servers that they have access to. I mean, keep in mind, this is kind of just before cloud was really taking off. So, I mean, this was back in 2003-ish. And so there was, you know, it was people using their own physical hardware or systems that people would donate to them. And, you know, we would basically build, you know, right on that system. And then we would share the keys just kind of amongst ourselves. And we had to manage those private, you know, the private keys and the secrets to those private keys. This was not there was not an infrastructure such that we can actually build up that team. Every time we add another person to the team, we're potentially increasing our risk envelope or the risk profile on those keys getting out. So that team was always incredibly small. We had a lot of people that always asked, how do we join? How do we help? And it always came back down to, they're just sorry, there's a lot of, we need help, but we can't let you help. And it's not that we don't trust anybody, but you know, we don't trust anybody. I mean, not in a negative way. I mean, so we've approached it extremely differently here. And I want to make sure that other people on the team get an opportunity to talk about this. So maybe Neil and Lewis would be really good to talk about what it is we're doing different with Rocky. So I'm going to hand the mic over to them. Neil, why don't you start?
Oh, are you sure? I was waiting for Lewis to go.
I figured Lewis will fill in any gaps afterwards with regards to the specifics on the development process.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that's definitely really important to me in particular, and was for Taylor and I from the beginning, was making sure that we're doing things that are in a scalable way, people-wise, so that we can have a, you know, foundation where we don't have to rely on, as Greg said, you know, a handful of people with the keys, but instead can sign packages and ensure the trust across those packages and the delivery process. kind of more programmatically and in a community-based way that spreads the ability to sign that from not just a trusted group of 5 people, but a trusted group across the entire community that can evolve and persist across people's passing unexpectedly or needing to leave the project or just life or anything else that might happen. So it's quite important to us from that perspective to be using things like Terraform and Ansible and doing a lot of this development out in the open so that we can enable the community to audit and look and see the transparency that's coming through. And I don't think we're going to go as far as Fedora does, where they you can sign up and get like read-only SSH access to their servers, but we want to be transparent in a way that is more cloud native and conforms with more modern security practices, which also just involve a lot of these sorts of non-individual based signing scenarios with security or any of those such things. And it's taking some time to work on that because of everything moving so fast, but we're working really hard on ways to kind of hide away the private information like IP addresses and secrets and all of that stuff in a way that is open to the community, that they can consume and look at and change the playbooks and Terraform configurations that they need to without necessarily seeing the underlying kind of private information of Rocky Linux that could expose us security wise. So it is a quite difficult game to play and balance the needs of security of the organization and the build chain versus having it open to everyone that can just submit patches and code and help us with the infrastructure and work on it. So that's kind of our big challenge right now, but it's something we're super passionate about, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work on.
So out of interest, Neil, has there been any consideration of, say, using something like open build service that would, say, help with some of those things?
There's a lot, I guess, on the table, and I guess Lewis could probably speak a little bit more to this, but there's pretty much just limitless options because we are doing a lot of the tooling to build the distribution in different ways. But that being said, we're pulling some things from Fedora to use, such as Koji and Punji and some other tools that don't necessarily work in ways that you would expect them to or want them to. And because of the tight integration between all of the tooling, it's kind of hard to have a build environment that's scalable in so far as splitting up capacity quickly or putting it in another kind of cloud like OBS or these other places. But we'd absolutely love to be able to have some of those sorts of systems available to use and offer to the community if they want that. But there's also other services that exist that offer the same type of thing. So I guess it remains to be seen.
Yeah, so I can speak to the the open build service kind of thing. We do have like some ideas, like myself and the rest of release engineering. We kind of have some ideas of how we kind of want to approach it, because we want something similar like that, because we want to have basically a community build service, because we have to have a way to like enable special interest groups, right? And we don't really like have like anything like completely 100% planned or whatever, like Neil said, like everything's just kind of on the table, or we haven't really done a lot of investigation, but we definitely are looking into that because we want to enable special interest groups in the community to put stuff into a build pipeline and such like that. Of course, with can't just let everyone like submit a package and all of a sudden it shows up in Rocky, right? But the point is we want to have those kind of systems in place. We don't want to mix our current build system that's building the operating system with the community build service. So we talk about it every once in a while, but right now we haven't talked about it because we're just working away trying to get the first release candidate out. So that's what I can say about that.
Cool. I mean, there's quite a good question. Maybe this steps right into now, which is, so you've got RC1 coming out in 2 days. So what's the roadmap for GA?
That actually is a good question. So
ask us in a week.
Yeah.
It's going to come down to testers. How much of the community is actually actively testing that? How many bug reports are we getting, and how many thumbs up are we getting on how well did we do on that first iteration of that release candidate? If we get a lot of people testing this, that tells us, yeah, this is awesome. We're not seeing any bugs, right? That definitely builds our confidence for making a GA release sooner. If we get a lot of people that test and give us a lot of bug reports, right? That's a great thing, but now we have to go back and fix all those, respin that release candidate and make sure that we're getting them. If we don't get a large number of testers, that's the issue. That will basically give us a somewhat undeterminate timeline in terms of when that GA is going to come out. So the point is we need as many testers as we can possibly get to start hammering on this ISO, identify all the issues that we can possibly identify. And it's really just going to come down to then the responses of those testers.
Yeah, something else that I wanted to add, there's a little bit in the chat there, a side conversation going that really ties into all of this as well. And it's around the topic of involving the community, in particular, people who might not have packaging or developer experience. So our testing channel, as I'm looking at it right now, has 718 people. And we started that a week ago. Was it 2 weeks? Something like that. So we have plenty of places for people to contribute if you have never done any kind of development whatsoever. So regardless of your technical background or depth, we can find a place for you, right? Even if it's not in testing, if that is in documentation, or if that's with coordination. We have some folks who are providing immense value right now, and who have never even done any development whatsoever. So if there's an area where you'd like to contribute, we're pretty confident that we can find a lot of space for you. So I'm
going to add to that real quickly. My background in doing OS development is obviously quite a bit dated. And Leigh, I'm also going to use you as a pointer here as well. Leigh's a tremendous network engineer and architect, absolutely, but he also doesn't have a huge amount of experience doing operating system development and packaging with RPM and whatnot. And what it is that we're doing, with this infrastructure, there are more hoops to jump through than just going and grabbing a source RPM and modifying that source RPM or that spec and then rebuilding it. There is more hoops to jump through because of this infrastructure. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to lower that barrier of entry. Leigh was able to pick this up, and he actually got commit, don't tell anyone, but he got commit access before I did, and that hurt. But with that being said, he was actually fixing more packages than me, and I'm like, oh, I gotta catch up to Leigh now. But not to kind of being kind of silly about this, but the point is that my knowledge is dated. Leigh has not done this before. Within a few days, we were actually contributing packages. And there is a difference between people that are contributing and helping, and kind of some of the core people that are actually responsible for what packages go into the OS and how does it go in. And we've Mustafa, who's not here, has created some capabilities around modifying and patching packages in a way that doesn't just use patch, and it's actually quite configurable using Perto 3. It's quite configurable. There's a lot you can do with it, but it's just something else you got to learn. Once you learn that, and we're actually building up those docs now, Wally and team have been on building up the documentation. I've been building a bunch of scripts and tools around lowering that barrier to entry. But again, it's more difficult than just building a package yourself. There's a little bit more to jump through, a little bit more to do, but we are lowering that barrier as much as we can. We're documenting exactly what needs to happen. Such again, we can build up a much larger, more inclusive community than what CentOS has ever had in the past.
Okay, Ezekiel, do you want to ask one of your questions? I'm not
Sure.
There you go.
I was just going to start with the first one. Let's see. Yeah, do we know or have any idea how many hosting, virtual private server, or hardware server providers are looking at Rocky Linux specifically to provide it for their customers?
All of them. We're gonna have images in the AWS Marketplace, on Azure, Google, Naver. There's even images and container groups, but in terms of the actual hyperscalers and a lot of the smaller ones too, not the traditional big three, we've spoken to as well. So Rocky will be available. You will have to go out of your way to try and find some place where it's not available.
Cool.
I think I'd like to put a bounty on that. If you find some place that's not available, then let us know.
I think it's worth noting that we want to be available everywhere. That's the goal is to be available wherever you want us to be. So if you do find somewhere where we're not, let us know and we'll see what we can do.
File a bug.
Yeah.
Ezekiel, you had another question that I was quite interested in the answer to. The one about, I've got to find it now, about kind of small IT companies, support companies.
Yes. Okay. So this was an odd one. I'm not involved in any company like this, but it was just crossed my mind. How do you feel about, obviously, us local IT firms specializing in Rocky Linux? I mean, that part I'm sure you like, but how would you feel about them using Rocky in the name or their branding, not necessarily the logo, but calling themselves something like the Rocky Experts or something like that?
So that's an interesting question because we do have the notion of sponsorships, and so organizations that are even if they're small consulting groups and whatnot, I mean, if they're individuals and small, obviously we have no issue with it. But this is where sponsorships and the benefit of sponsorships really comes into play, because we want organizations to sponsor what it is that we're doing and help what it is that we're doing. So as part of the different levels of sponsorships, we have, it's either 3 or 4 levels, I'm blanking out right now. Every organization that we've spoken with so far, because the cost is not very high, every organization we've spoken to, even small ones, are tier 1s. They are principal sponsors. And with each level of sponsorship, you get a different amount of media and access to the trademark being Rocky Linux. So if somebody wants to go and develop a consulting company, or they want to sell product, sell kit with this on it, anything like that, we do encourage them just to sponsor us, and they'll get that sub-license of the trademark. And then it basically also gets them we get to put their name on the website. They'll have some quotes from us. We'll help them with some PRs and vice versa. But that's really the benefit there. If somebody wants to use the trademark without paying us, I mean, you're sponsoring us. I mean, we're not like very litigious, so we're not really going to start suing people and sending out cease and desists, but they technically, it is a trademark.
I mean, I think that kind of segues us into another question, which is kind of, how is funding going about for the foundation? And can you talk about that a little bit?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the whole thing. How is funding going? Is that what you said?
Yeah, how is the foundation funded? Is it mainly through this sponsorship scheme, or have you got kind of donations, etc.?
Yes, so we have both individual donations as well as sponsorships. I guess there's 4 ways that anybody can kind of become involved with what it is we're doing. The first one is individuals can just join and just contribute. The second one is individuals can donate. We have a donate button, and we've actually received a fairly large amount of donations so far. Then we have, so that's kind of on the individual side. Then we have corporate side. And on the corporate side, we have the idea of sponsorship and partnerships. Sponsorships are really, it's what I was referring to earlier. It's basically, it's basically a donation, a cash donation or wire donation or whatever, but it's a donation, a financial donation towards the entity from a corporation, from an organization. And then there's partnerships. Partnerships are other ways that organizations can be helping and taking part formally to either benefit the organization or benefit users of the organization. So let me give an example. If a company wanted to, this is actually a real world example, right? So we have a storage provider that basically is leveraging Rocky on their storage appliance. Right, so they're leveraging Rocky, they're using Rocky, and then they're distributing it and they're selling it to their customers, and helping those customers with any issues that they have, whatnot, and then contributing that back up. That's a partnership. So meaning they're not necessarily also paying a sponsorship, but they're basically doing a partnership to help. That's basically the difference. And we do have a number of organizations that are basically both partners as well as sponsors. Monta Vista, I think, is the most recent one that just joined. They do embedded support and embedded appliances for, I believe it's automotive and what is it, Leigh? Automotive and telecommunications, I believe, right?
Yeah, and appliances.
Yep. So, and they're basically doing the same thing. They're offering support and offering, additional capabilities to their customers. That's a partnership. And then they're sponsoring us as well, which gives them now the ability to use media kits and whatnot. So they can go out there and use the trademark and give them a sub license and whatnot on the trademark.
A question that was asked a minute ago. The reason why I was interested in that one is because I do work for a small Linux IT support company or Linux support company, and we do plan to offer kind of day one support and consultancy services for customers running Rocky Linux. Is there anything that we need to consider to avoid treading on your trademarks? I mean, we haven't copied your logo or anything. We have used the words Rocky Linux in our kind of support pages and tweets and so on. Is there anything we need to do to avoid stepping on your toes? I mean, we do plan on looking at becoming a sponsor, but of course, we need to it has to generate us some business to start with before we can afford to do that. I mean, we do other things, we support other products, but with regards to Rocky Linux specifically, do we need to do anything to avoid treading on you or treading on your toes?
Need to. I'd say, I'm not going to I can't formally go on record and say anything here. The formal response, I guess I should say, is you should probably talk to us about a sponsorship. We have multiple levels and it'll probably meet your needs, and it's not a large investment at all. It's really, it's a token amount to basically just help us a little bit, but it basically provides some value. We found that just giving away stuff for free, a lot of organizations don't find value in it unless you actually charge for it. It's kind of funny. But with that being said, the informal response is, again, we're not interested in fighting anyone or going after trademarks. To some extent, we have to, just due to trademark law in the US. But at the same token, we're not going to spend our time doing that. So the formal answer is, yeah, be a sponsor, and we'll actually help you by basically putting your logo and information on our website and whatnot, and people can actually see your company and whatnot as they come to see Rocky and so on and so forth. So there's value there. But at the same token, if you choose not to, I'm not saying, I can't say that we're not going to do anything, but I'm personally not going to do anything.
Sure. I think the way the question previously was framed was around a company using the word Rocky or Rocky Linux in their either company name or a product name, and we certainly won't be doing that. We won't be branding ourselves as Rocky Linux Support UK or anything like that. But yeah,
actually, Adam, let me use this as an opportunity to bring Rob into the call. Rob, if you're at your desk, I'd love to get your take on that as well.
That one's always tough. There's definitely some inherent risk there to Rocky Enterprise. Whenever you're kind of brought into, or I guess linked up with another, company. From a legal standpoint, I'm not aware of anything short of copyright or trademark that would be an issue. Where it would start to potentially be an issue would be if you guys were offering stuff on behalf of Rocky Linux, at which point that opens us up to quite a bit of risk. Yeah, I guess, does that answer your question?
And yeah, Rob, thank you for jumping in on that. And the other thing that I would mention is when we came out with Rocky Linux, the Linux Foundation contacted us because they hold the trademark on Linux. And we actually had to go and formally request a sub-license to use Linux itself. So I would say, again, this isn't a tool that we're trying to use to get sponsors. This is a benefit to sponsors, but this is not a forcing function. If there are organizations out there that want to use Rocky Linux and they want to say Rocky Linux on their website, I would just encourage you to contact us. Because it may be just as easy as we'll just talk about it real quick and we'll just give you a sub license to use it, give you approval to use it, so you don't have to buy it. But again, I would say that this is part of this is one of the benefits of being a sponsor.
And
right.
One thing I want to quickly add to that, from putting my design lead hat on, is that that there would be no problem if you wanted to, feature our icon or our logotype in promotional material for support plans, that sort of thing. It's not been sort of built in a way that would prevent you from displaying that sort of thing either on your website or on flyers or however you want to do marketing for it.
Awesome. I know some companies are a little bit fussy about that.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, guys. I appreciate it. Dan Lynn,
send us a note, Adam, and we'll help you get sorted out.
Sure, thank you. I'll take a look at your sponsorship tiers first and see what level we can come in at. It's really, I just don't want to upset anybody's rights or trademark or anything.
No, and ultimately, from the U.S. standpoint, the only reason that would potentially come up would be if we legally had to enforce it to make sure we didn't lose it.
Sure. Thank you. Dan Lynch, Dan, I was going to just prompting Dan Lynch to ask his question. He's saying which one. You can ask whichever question that you like, Dan. The one I saw was about I've forgotten it now. Your first one, I think. I didn't see. Not sure I saw the second one.
About the legal side of it, the entity side of it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, ask whatever you want now. You're here.
Oh, okay. Right. Well, on the spot, no pressure. Yeah, thanks for all the information, guys. It's really interesting to hear about this. I was curious about. I don't want to take this conversation back too far, really, but you talked about the legal side of this and setting up a legal entity, which absolutely makes sense and all of that. I just wondered if you'd looked at partnering with somebody like the Software Freedom Conservancy, who I have to admit are friends of mine and I help out sometimes, or an existing group as well, to kind of expand what you're doing with the charter and so on.
You want to jump on that?
Yeah, my stream cut out for just a minute. I hate to. You want to just repeat that one more time for me, Dan? Unless you want to take it.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, no problem. No, I was just wondering with the charter and the community and that side of things and having a legal entity, whether you'd I mean, you mentioned SPI before, Software in the Public Interest. I have some friends at the Software Freedom Conservancy, and some of their stuff they do seemed a bit similar to what you were talking about, like hosting other projects and helping to do stuff like that. I just wondered if you'd considered partnering with somebody like that to expand the kind of movement or expand what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think we would. I think we'd be happy to talk to anybody. The reason that we came about the way that we did was because at the time we either weren't aware of those options or hadn't talked to people, and we needed something in place, and we had our own vision for what we wanted to do. So that's why we took off the way that we did. But in terms of partnering with other organizations, for any kind of mutual benefit. I think we're always happy to talk to other like-minded individuals. I don't see the RESF going away. I don't see that we would merge or be absorbed, just because again when we started, it wasn't a decision like people were sort of reaching out to us and letting us asking if we wanted to join. It was more like we got together and kind of looked around, and we worked with what we had at the time available. So that's we weren't trying to snub anybody. If that, I don't know if that
No, I didn't mean to imply that. Don't worry.
Yeah, and so the Open Invention Network is another example. They reached out to us, so we checked that out and joined them. But again, we're always happy to talk with other like-minded folks. Pretty much whatever we do, one of the key questions that we always ask ourselves is this thing going to benefit the community? If the answer is no, then we'll probably be a little more skeptical. If the answer is solidly yes, then we're going to be a lot more inclined to take a look at that.
Okay, Julian, if you're still here, I think you had an interesting question that's kind of in a similar area. If you can unmute yourself and ask your question, otherwise I'll raise it for you. He's either scrambling for his microphone or he's not got one. So I'll ask the question myself. He said, is there a long-term vision for the foundation to host components other than Rocky Linux? And as it grows, would it become something like the Apache or Linux Foundation?
So kind of going back to what I was saying regarding the vision of that, I can tell you that from a company side, if I put my CEO hat on, it's very important for me as I'm releasing open source software to ensure that open source software is going to have a very long life in the open source world. So I'm very much in favor of contributing and putting my software into an organization like Rocky. If there are other organizations out there that are interested in doing that, the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation is a really kind of nice and pleasant place to do that. It's very easy to join. It's still small enough that it's there's not a lot of bureaucracy. And to one of the points that Leigh was making earlier, right? Partnering with another organization is one thing, but a lot of times these organizations have a tendency to get extraordinarily heavyweight and bureaucratic and very difficult to get stuff done. I do have a grand vision for this in the sense of, I hope that there's other projects that come and are part of what it is that we're doing. But at the same token, I don't want the foundation to get so big and so cumbersome that things don't get done. And so I want to make sure that we always have a very light and nimble ability to stay focused and to onboard products, onboard ideas and whatnot, but not necessarily get so overwhelmed that if a project wanted to join us, it's going to be we got to wait a few months, we got to get approvals, we've got to do all these sorts of things that that may actually kind of detract from the goals of the organization. So there's a lot here to still to think about. The grand vision is yes, I'd love to see more projects coming under this, such that organizations and enterprises can have more confidence in basically the open source platforms that they're leveraging. I've spoken with numerous enterprises that are actually starting to get nervous about implementing open source software stacks that are being driven and maintained by a company, because they don't know what's going to happen with that, and they've been burned now a couple times. So I want to do whatever I can to help ensure that there's confidence in open source and leveraging open source. And again, with my CEO hat on, if it's open source, I don't feel like I need to run it. I don't want to run it. I actually want the community to run it, and I want that project to become as successful, big, and helpful to the community as absolutely possible, and collaborative. As soon as a company wants to run it themselves, I think that there's some concern there. And I've been in both situations now, and I have to say, I mean, I've learned a lot in both situations, and I've learned what I think is the right way of doing it. And I absolutely think a company needs to basically feel that if they're going to open source something, that they are not going to be the single control entity of that, because I think that's somewhat dangerous.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. So we're going to move on to some questions about contributions now. Somebody has asked, I didn't catch who it was. Thankfully, I have to say John Kennedy and Chris Ellis are doing a great job capturing the questions and kind of lining them up. That means I can pay a bit more attention to what you're actually saying. So I didn't catch who this one was, but they asked, what would be the process for a software developer to release a package for Rocky Linux? And a follow-on to that, would packages included in Red Hat Enterprise Linux also be included in Rocky Linux by default?
I could take that, but I'm trying to give others on the team a chance to talk. Leigh, you went off mute. Did you want to grab that?
Actually, I was going to say the same thing. I was going to point at Lewis.
Lewis, you got 2 points.
So can you? I'm sorry to ask this, but could you repeat the question? I was working on some Rocky stuff, so could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's kind of a two-stage question that are kind of partly related to each other. So the first part of it was, what would be the process for a software developer to release a package for Rocky Linux?
Oh, so like when I think, so I'm trying to think of how to answer that question. So I guess in the sense of, you know, if we have extra repositories or like special interest groups and such, right, which is going to be an inevitable thing. We don't really have like a process completely nailed like down, but high level how we envision it to be, and this can potentially change or however, because things are organic, so things can change. For people to submit stuff, we envision giving someone the ability, or a group of people, to like go into our Git. We have a git.rockylinux.org site that's got all of our stuff on it for packages and such. So they can actually like contribute their specs, their sources, and stuff like that if they want to submit something. And then it has to eventually go through my team, release engineering, so we can actually get it added into our orchestrator tool. So we have an orchestrator tool that my co-lead, who the kid's a genius. He came up with some really great tools to handle all this stuff. And you know, we would basically put it into there, and then we can submit it and, you know, apply it to, hey, it's got to go to this repo, it's got to go through, it's got to do these things. We do, in the middle of all this, you know, there will be like, oh, you know, we got to make sure it actually builds right. Got to make sure it, builds right. Have to make sure that, you know, that it stages correctly, it installs correctly, and such like that. Again, we don't have like the full we have a high level idea of how we want to do it, just not the full process. Ideally, from my point of view, though, what we do want to do is we want to actually have kind of like, how do I explain this? Kind of like a sponsorship sort of thing where someone doesn't know an RPM or such like that, myself or others who have that said skill can basically mentor others into doing as such. Basically assuming like, okay, whatever they want to build or whatever doesn't have an RPM spec somewhere online, so they want to do something brand new, which is very, very possible. I mean, the sky's the limit there. We can easily mentor those into, mentor anyone who has that interest, and then, go through whatever process we come up with to allow that package to be part of our mini repositories. I don't know if that answers the question completely, but
Can I, Chad, I want to jump in real quick, and I know I hogged the mic, I'm sorry. But one point I just wanted to add was for existing packages in RHEL, those will just basically filter straight down into Rocky, so there's nothing that you'd have to do there. If you want additional packages that are not currently in the upstream repositories, that's when things kind of go a different route. We have SIG groups. That is how we are planning on doing this right now. So what I would suggest is to join a SIG group if there is not a SIG group that really meets the need of what you want to incorporate. Talk to us about, let's create a new SIG group or do something different. But right now it's kind of all under the umbrella of different SIG groups. So people that are bringing in, again, from my experience, high performance computing packages. We're going to be adding a bunch of HPC kit and capabilities to Rocky, and we're going to be doing that through SIG HPC. So if there is a SIG group that fits kind of where a particular developer wants to develop code into or contribute code to, great. That's easy. If there's not an existing SIG to do that in, that's when we have to have a different conversation. I don't know if that conversation is about having maybe a general SIG or a general additional packages SIG, or if it is creation of a new SIG, but that conversation should then be had.
Thank you. I just found that question was from Sebastian Crane. Sorry, I didn't see your name beforehand. So we have some questions about, let me find them, like more related to, sorry, before I move on, I'm about to move on to another topic, but there was one more question remaining. Sorry about that. So you mentioned earlier about testing for Rocky Linux and the need for testers and kind of the pace of a first general availability release being dependent on testers. So how can people help with testing Rocky Linux?
So there is right now there's a testing channel in our Mattermost. Probably hopping in there is going to be the quickest way to do that. There is a testing category on our forums, but if you join the testing channel, then in the channel topic at the top, there's a link to a document, and then a little message there to Jessica Jonitz. She will help make sure that you get added. You can hop in there right now and start chatting and seeing what plans are and checking out that document. That's the easiest, quickest way.
Do you guys have any idea about the number of contributors that you already have?
There are currently 720 members in the testing channel. It grew by 2 in the past 30 minutes.
Hopefully that was 2 people from here.
Yeah.
So I alluded to this a moment ago and kind of had to backtrack, but we have a bunch of questions related to the project itself. So the next one that's been kind of queued up is, I haven't read this, so it looks quite long. So before I start, I haven't read it to the end, but I'll read it out as it is. So the upstream Linux kernel configuration enables Zen paravirtualized mode, PVH mode, guests by default, but Red Hat and CentOS disabled that, which is something that no other distribution has done as far as I know. As a result, people running such guests had to switch to running the kernel ML kernel from EL repo. Is Rocky likely to diverge from Red Hat in a decision like that? Perhaps, I hope you're following me. Perhaps a wider question of how close do you intend to stick to Red Hat's package configuration choices, even when those choices seem Red Hat specific? And that's from Andy Smith.
So I can actually answer that.
Go for it, Lewis.
So we are going to stick with whatever they have, because we plan on sticking with whatever upstream is doing. We're trying to be like for like, right? Which I know that's not the answer that a lot of people want to hear. But that's why projects like EL repo exists for stuff like that, because there's also cases too where certain RHEL releases come out and older hardware just stops working because the kernel, they decided, okay, we're going to remove the support from the kernel. So then you have to go to places like EL repo and such like that to get stuff like that, which has been a very common case, at least for as long as I've been in the CentOS community. That was always something that we always recommended there, was to go to EL repo. So we don't plan on like diverging at all. But that doesn't mean that we won't plan on, for example, having anything custom at some point. Like, like we keep mentioning SIGs, we could eventually have something that has to have different kernel versions to handle certain specific use cases. Like there's going to be some like ARM boards that are not supported by the kernel by default. So we're going to have our own to deal with it from a SIG point of view. So that's very likely that's going to happen.
Yeah, laptops too. There's been a lot of talk about integration with laptops. As you probably know, running Linux on a laptop usually requires a fairly new kernel if you have a newer laptop. And so having a newer kernel option or a different kernel option or options, depending on SIG, depending on interest, depending on necessity, I think is absolutely valid. And to Lewis's point, he's exactly right. And I'm just noticing Slack now, and Skip, who's on our development team, an incredibly fantastic person. Hey, Skip. Yeah, he's basically quoted bug for bug compatible with upstream RHEL. So if they have a bug, we expect to have the same bug. If they don't, if we have a bug, we expect to then, if somebody goes and checks, RHEL will have it as well.
Hey, Greg, sorry to butt in here. This is Rob. I have to hop off for like 15, 20 minutes. I'll be right back. Just make sure nothing pops up in the meantime.
I want to take the opportunity to ask you about special interest groups. I know you've mentioned them a few times. My understanding, as you just said, and I think you said Skip had posted in the chat, that the intention for this this first release at the very least is to be bug for bug compatible, one for one with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So I understand that your intention is to use special interest groups to kind of branch out where you need to. And I think I remember hearing you mention on a podcast, Greg, that would maybe be options in the installer to choose from special interest group package groups. Do you want to just kind of explain a little bit about what special interest groups you already have and anything more that you want to say about them, I guess?
So this is one of those times where I have an idea on how we can do something. I didn't validate it with anybody, and I just said, oh, that kind of makes sense in my head, and I know that there's precedent for it, and so I said it. But yeah, that is not something we've formally decided upon at this point. That was an idea that I had in my head in terms of how to implement that. And just to kind of give the context, what I was referring to, or at least thinking in my head at the time, was in the installer, right? We can have a SIG compliant installer, which has a separate page where you can choose which SIG groups you want to activate at install time, and possibly even change your package selection as a result of that. So again, the standard installer that we're going to have is going to be absolutely compatible and directly mirroring what Red Hat Enterprise Linux does, because that's our upstream goal, right? So you go and grab, the Rocky installer. It's going to be every single window, every single bit of that is going to be as close to Red Hat and CentOS, at least as CentOS used to be, as absolutely possible. We may at some point have a SIG enabled installer, which just has another window or another pane that basically allows you to select different SIGs and then add those package repositories for those SIGs, such that if you're going to install, let's say an HPC, system, you can grab this SIG installer, select the HPC SIG and package groups, and right from the moment of having it, of running that installer, you now have a system that's ready to go. So that was the idea of that. Whether that's how feasibly possible that is, I'm pretty sure that's possible, because Scientific Linux did that for a while as they were making changes and configuration changes and deltas for different DOE sites. So I know that it's possible, at least it was at some point. I don't know what the lift is going to be for doing that. And again, that has not been validated by the rest of the team. So they may kick me a little bit later in Mattermost and say, what the hell are you thinking, Greg? But with that being said, it should be pretty easy. Worst case scenario is you're basically just installing a couple extra release packages for each one of those SIGs, and then doing just DNF installs or package groups or whatever from those SIGs.
Cool. I have to admit that I may have heard that you say that in a podcast in either December or January. So when I knew that we were having you speak, I basically stalked every bit of kind of media that you'd been in, just to hear as much as possible about what was going on. So sorry about that. I have a question from Dave Dijkstra, if you want to ask it, Dave.
Question was about you're talking about the one. I think I had more than one. You mean the one about the risk of Red Hat cutting off more things?
That's
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is the risk of Red Hat doing something like saying they own the packaging, the spec files, and a lot of the packages? What if they say are going to stop distributing those, or any other kind of thing that Red Hat could do to thwart your effort? What would you do?
That question comes up actually quite a bit. And I usually have two ways of explaining it. First, I explain it as why they would have to be dumb to do that. And that's because, if we just look at the numbers, and sorry for being harsh about it, but if you just look at the numbers of installs, right, at some point CentOS was about 50% of servers on the internet and enterprise. Now it's about 20 to 25%. That's a really big number still, right? At some point we hope to grow back up to about 50% with Rocky, but at least, even if we just stick, let's say at the low number, 20%, right? We get all of the CentOS systems over the next few years, they all migrate over to Rocky. There's about 20%, let's say, of the enterprise and internet that's running that. The last numbers I've heard for Red Hat were about 1%. Now, there is a value, a Red Hat value, in knowing that they have a direct on-ramp to that 20%, right? It's a direct conversion, right? There's absolute compatibility. That's a value to Red Hat. And as long as they see it as it is being a value to Red Hat, I don't think that there's any risk. We want to do that. We want that compatibility as well, because we want to know that there's a larger group of people that's also helping, and we're collaborating with that help in the operating system. So if we find bugs, there's a question regarding bugs that I saw scroll in the chat. If we find a bug, or one of our users find a bug and we fix it, we're going to push that fix to CentOS Stream. Right. So there's another, CentOS Stream then is going to roll back into Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and then we're going to get it eventually. But there's another benefit by having the two extremely kind of closely related. If Red Hat, so now I'm going to go the other direction. If Red Hat does something to break it, and to say, and actually, this conversation legally has come up a lot, and we've debated it a little bit. We all have different opinions on it, because none of this has legal precedent at this point. But is it actually possible for Red Hat to relicense the spec file for their RPMs in a non-distributable, with a non-distributable license? I think it is. So they could, in fact, I think, actually do this. Would they? I don't think they would, for not only the reasons I mentioned before, but also because the fact that CentOS Stream now is supposed to be the development platform or the beta platform for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and that all of that whole Git repository is in the public. It's open source. It's in the public. So they would have to absolutely, I mean, they'd have to shift something extraordinarily fundamental to do that. But let's take the grand leap and say they do that. Where that's going to end up then is, well, as I said, we got like 10,000 people who joined our Slack in like a couple months. Since then, we keep growing. The visibility of all of the documents and whatnot, I had a PR person go through and just look at, what was the visibility, what was the impression count and whatnot. Right after, I think we were like 2.5, 3 months into this, there was 60 million people following what we're doing. Now it's probably closer to about 100 million. And if you think about these numbers, that's massive. If Red Hat were to do something to actually make what we're doing impossible, we'd have to fork. And if we fork, I don't think we're going to have a hard time building up enough resources within the community to help us with that fork. But there will absolutely 100% be a fork. And that fork will now diverge from Red Hat's base. That would do a disservice to Red Hat as well as to us. So as long as the people making decisions on this on the Red Hat side see this big picture, and unless they have information that I'm somehow missing, I can't imagine how they would ever make that decision. It would not be in their benefit, which means I think we're always going to have a nice, good compatibility between Red Hat Enterprise Linux that we would voluntarily look at as upstream versus forking it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's beneficial. I'm just hoping that they see it from that perspective.
That's good. That's good to know. I did hear at least the current people at Red Hat saying we have no intention of doing that. So at least you don't know what's going to happen in the future. That's nice to know that they have that motivation. I hadn't thought of that.
I remember speaking to some Red Hat employees a long time ago now, admittedly, and they were saying that they were quite happy to have the CentOS project. Admittedly, that was about 10 years ago or so. As you said, I think that Rocky Linux and CentOS, as it was, serve as a kind of good on-ramp to kind of monetizing customers using Red Hat derivatives, as it were. I think, John Kennedy, do you want to ask your question? Before we move on?
Mine's not quite as deep. This question isn't quite as deep as some of the rest, so it's a good light question. Red Hat's primary color is red. CentOS was blue. Is it correct to guess that Rocky will be more green because of the logo? And so your rebranding will be green.
So I'm going to let Hayden talk on this, but green's my favorite color.
Mine too. So I like it.
I'd like to point out that that's the first I've heard of Greg's color preference.
Job for life.
I mean, the goal is to. I mean, as from a design perspective, we've slowly been building guidelines for anything like directly associated with Rocky Linux and the RASF. So a lot of the rebranding will probably be the green that we've used in all of our branding to this point. There are going to be exceptions to this, like GTK themes, that sort of thing, where we've rebranded a package but not necessarily its contents, that sort of thing. But I think in any cases where we've rebranded the contents of a package, like the I'll give an example, the default index.html page for Nginx, for example, that sort of thing will definitely follow the sort of the green and the design language, I guess, that we've used everywhere else. I don't know if any of that makes sense. That's all off the top of my head, but
It does make sense, because I know a while back I talked to Kanabir Singh at the last Linux World in London, and we were talking about the differences. He's the one that mentioned that the biggest fun for you guys is changing as much of the Red Hat branding as you can.
oh yeah.
Well, for CentOS, it was changing as much of the Red Hat branding as you could during the build.
I know I spent a good 5 days, obviously, around my day job, basically taking the CentOS logos package, finding every finding every instance of a CentOS logo, and sort of rethinking how I could do it for Rocky, and then sort of compiling that into a GitHub repository. That was enjoyable, because obviously you got to sort of put together wallpapers and different usages of the logo and that sort of thing. So
Okay. So somebody asked this question. I've just been trying to look at who it was, but I can't find it. And I found another question in the meantime. So I'm just going to pop this in the document. I'm sorry, I couldn't find the name for this question, but I'm going to reframe it slightly to be around something that I was thinking of asking myself, which is, the person asked, would there be any advantage to using Rocky Linux over moving to Ubuntu instead? And so to reframe that slightly, my question was going to be, why should somebody move to Rocky Linux as opposed to moving to either SUSE or Ubuntu or Debian, or why, or even Alma Linux, another kind of Red Hat fork? Why should people choose Rocky Linux?
I'd be happy to throw my hat in here, at least, my personal opinion. They shouldn't. They should choose whatever operating system is going to work best for them, and I think that this has been something that even 45 Drives, which I think we've mentioned, has come on, and they've talked about wanting to, their product is primarily based on CentOS Linux, and their whole thing was like, you know what, we're going to make our product available on 2 operating systems. And frankly, I think that is something that every company, enterprise, etc., should be doing, because who knows what's going to happen to Rocky today, tomorrow, a month from now, a year from now. Who knows what's going to happen to any of these operating systems? And it's definitely a bet to go on Rocky. And I promise that we're committed to delivering this stuff, but none of us can really speak to the longevity of this stuff. So I would encourage people to make the decision kind of on their own about what their requirements are. But that being said, we are an option that I think is worth a tremendous amount of investigation for companies and individuals, because of what we stand for. And we really do truly stand for transparency and honesty and security throughout all things, and openness with the community. So I think that if there's any reason to not go with another sort of distribution versus anything else, is the framework that we've set up for ourselves and for the community to be not controlled by any commercial entity.
I think.
Yeah, just
go on. Sorry.
Just to add to what Neil said, I think he's got it right. We've done everything that we think that we can and should do to ensure the long-term stability of the project. We've put an awful lot of thought into this, and we think we've done it right. But we don't see ourselves as competitors to anybody else. That's really not how we view things. We are focused on doing the best that we can with the values that we have, all the things that Neil just mentioned, and involving the community. We have our principles and our mission. You can read about that again on our website under our community charter. And if those align with what your needs are, and if you like an RPM based system, and you're in agreement that an enterprise operating system should be open and community driven, then come and join us. And if not, then cool, man, you do you.
And
I think, sorry, again, carry on.
Sorry, to go back for Adam's sake, the original question about Ubuntu was asked by Gautam C, and I hope I didn't abuse your name too badly. But that's who asked the initial question that Adam modified.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say that when I tried to chip in last time, I thought that you'd finished answering the question. So I was just going to say more or less what you went on to say, Leigh. I know I'm not a part of the project, but I think what you said earlier about setting up the project so it has a foundation that behind it and cannot be acquired or controlled by a single entity is quite important. And I think for people to be able to get involved at this stage is probably quite exciting. So if people are, 15 years ago or however long ago it was, that the kind of Linux people looking for a project to hang their hat on found Ubuntu was a new exciting thing. And I think this year is you guys. So I think it's a great time for people that are looking for a project to get involved with. To find the Rocky Linux project is a great idea. And you set it up in such a way that it can't just go away easily and get swallowed up or controlled as happened with the previous kind of incumbent community-led distribution. So I think, does anybody have any other questions before we wrap up? We've gone quite deep, I think, here. There's nothing else that I could see in the chat. Let me just check the spreadsheet that Chris and John Kennedy have been maintaining. Is there any more that you think should be asked here?
The only ones left are the two that are not struck out, Adam. The one, and you were looking at both of them.
Sure. Okay. So I think this one is Roger B. What, if any, did the acquisition of Red Hat by IBM have to do with the new direction of CentOS? I'm not sure if that's something that you guys are happy to answer.
The only thing that I can share of what I know about that is Red Hat and, well, mostly Red Hat and IBM. Let me back up. Let me get my thoughts in order. IBM has reached out to me, some of my contacts, swearing that they were surprised as well. But yeah, who knows?
Sure. Okay. The last question that we have in the spreadsheet here is, so it says CentOS, I think this was from Sarah, CentOS repos do not provide security metadata about individual packages, such that we can't run security-only updates without workarounds. Will Rocky Linux be providing that metadata?
I believe we've talked about this. Lewis and I have talked about this a little bit. It's a very manual process, if I remember the conversation correctly. We're open to having a team to actually do this, but right now we don't have an automated way of doing this, and we don't have the people that have stepped up to actually volunteer to do this. And until that happens, I don't think we're going to offer that feature. Lewis, am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, no, you're right. Sorry about the noise in the background, but yeah, you're right. It's a lot of manual work.
So if we do get people that want to lead a team to commit to making sure that all updates are being annotated properly, we would love it, and the community would love that. But until we have somebody to do that, it's probably not going to happen.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions before I wrap up? I think we've reached the bottom. I can't see anything forthcoming at the moment. Yeah, that was question.
And Adam, that was Sarah, that last question.
Yeah, that was the last question, and that was from Sarah Williams. And Dan Lynch is very keen on the slogan "You do you." So I think I'd like to thank you all for coming. Not just Greg and Leigh and Lewis, but also your other guys, Hayden and Neil. And forgive me, there's quite a lot of other names that have come along from the Rocky Linux project. I want to thank you all for coming. Certainly far more of you, a greater showing than I was expecting. That's really good of you. And I've already thanked you for coming, but again, like you're 2 days away from a first release candidate, having set up a project in the last 4 to 5 months. And as I said in the introduction, that's an enormous achievement. So thank you for coming. And I'm sure you've got kind of far higher priorities to achieve today and stuff to get done in the next kind of 48 hours. So thank you very much for coming and speaking to us.
Thanks for having us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you guys.
Thank you. And thank you for putting up with my continued inability to work my head around different time zones. I've given you the wrong time at least twice. Sorry about that. I tried to be too clever. So I think other than that, that's the talk for this evening. And what follows is the Wolverhampton Linux User Group's weekly social. We do this every week as a social. So we try to have talks once a month. So if anybody wants to hang around and chat, then please do. Otherwise, as I said at the beginning, this